Ethan Carter had always been a man of power. As the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, he was used to making big decisions, signing important papers, and leading teams of highly skilled professionals. But lately, something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew deep down that he'd grown distant, not just from his employees, but from the world outside his glass-walled office. It wasn't boredom. It was more like a nagging feeling that he didn't understand how ordinary people lived anymore. So, when his assistant mentioned a trend where executives were working incognito jobs to reconnect with everyday life, Ethan decided to give it a try. He chose a small diner called Maggie's Kitchen, located in a quiet town about an hour away from the city. It wasn't flashy or modern. It was the kind of place you'd see in old movies, with checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and neon signs that flickered softly in the window. To prepare, Ethan bought a cheap pair of sneakers, rolled up the sleeves of an old shirt, and tucked it into plain black pants. He even borrowed a name tag from a friend who worked part-time at a coffee shop. Written across it in bold letters was Sam. On his first day, Ethan arrived early, before sunrise. The air smelled faintly of grease and freshly brewed coffee as he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the diner looked exactly as he'd imagined, cozy, warm, and alive with the sounds of clinking dishes and soft chatter. At the counter, an older woman with curly gray hair tied back in a loose bun greeted him with a smile. Her name tag read Maggie, and there was no mistaking that she was the heart and soul of this place. "You must be Sam," Maggie said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice was warm and welcoming, instantly putting Ethan at ease. "Welcome to Maggie's Kitchen. I hope you're ready for a busy day." Ethan nodded, trying to act confident despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I'm ready," he replied, though he wasn't sure if he believed himself. Maggie gave him a quick tour of the diner, showing him where everything was kept, the menus stacked neatly by the register, the coffee machine humming steadily in the corner, and the tiny kitchen tucked behind swinging double doors. That's where Ethan met Jake, the cook. Jake was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. His white chef's hat sat crookedly on his head, and his apron was splattered with what Ethan hoped was just sauce. When Maggie introduced them, Jake barely glanced up from the grill, grunting a half-hearted hello before returning to his work. Ethan spent the first hour shadowing another waiter named Lisa, who patiently explained how things worked. She showed him how to take orders, balance trays, and navigate the cramped space without bumping into customers or coworkers. It all seemed straightforward enough until the lunch rush hit. Suddenly, the diner was packed with hungry patrons, and Ethan found himself scrambling to keep up. Plates slipped from his fingers, drinks spilled onto tables, and he accidentally mixed up two orders, earning him a glare from both customers and Jake alike. Despite the chaos, Ethan couldn't help but notice the charm of the place. There was something comforting about the way Maggie greeted each customer by name, asking about their families or commiserating over bad weather. Even Lisa, who had every reason to be frustrated with Ethan's clumsiness, remained cheerful and encouraging. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was part of something real, something human. But not everything was perfect. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan began to pick up on subtle hints that something wasn't right. A few customers sent their meals back, complaining that the food tasted off. One man wrinkled his nose and said, "This burger smells like it's been sitting out for days." Another woman poked at her salad with a fork, muttering under her breath about how wilted the lettuce looked. Each time, Jake dismissed their complaints with a wave of his hand, muttering something about picky eaters or spoiled brats. Ethan wanted to ask questions, but he held back. After all, he was supposed to be just another waiter, not some nosy outsider poking around where he didn't belong. Still, the comments bothered him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than Jake let on. By the end of his shift, Ethan was exhausted. His feet ached, his arms felt like jelly, and his once pristine uniform was now covered in stains. But despite the fatigue, he felt oddly satisfied. Working at Maggie's Kitchen was nothing like running a multi-billion-dollar company, but in some ways it was even harder, and more rewarding. As he hung up his apron and prepared to leave, Maggie stopped him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did good today, Sam," she said with a proud smile. "It's tough your first day, but you'll get the hang of it." "Thanks, Maggie," Ethan replied, genuinely grateful for her kindness. "I'll do better tomorrow, I promise." As he walked out into the cool evening air, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden behind those swinging kitchen doors. Something about Jake's dismissive attitude, and the strange looks Maggie sometimes gave him, left Ethan uneasy. Whatever it was, he knew he wouldn't rest until he figured it out. Little did he know the answers would lead him down a path far darker than he could have ever imagined. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual, his mind racing with thoughts about Maggie's kitchen. He couldn't stop thinking about the strange things he'd noticed the day before, the complaints from customers, Jake's dismissive attitude, and the way Maggie seemed hesitant whenever the topic of food quality came up. Something wasn't right, and Ethan was determined to find out what it was. When he arrived at the diner, the place was quiet, just like it had been when he first walked in on his first day. Maggie was already there, wiping down tables and humming softly to herself. She looked up and smiled when she saw Ethan. "Morning, Sam," she said warmly. "Ready for round 2? Ethan nodded, forcing a smile as he tied his apron around his waist. "Ready as I'll ever be." Lisa was there too, setting up the coffee machine and stacking clean mugs behind the counter. She gave Ethan a quick nod and said, "You'll do better today. Just take it slow." Ethan appreciated her encouragement, but his mind was elsewhere. As soon as he had a moment to himself, he made his way toward the kitchen. The swinging doors creaked as he pushed them open, revealing Jake hard at work over the grill. The smell of frying oil and sizzling meat filled the air, masking something else, something sour and unpleasant. Ethan wrinkled his nose but didn't say anything. Throughout the morning, Ethan tried to stay focused on his tasks, but he kept noticing small details that made him uneasy. One customer sent back a plate of eggs, saying they smelled funny. Another complained that their soup tasted like it had gone bad. Each time, Jake rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, refusing to acknowledge any problems. Even Maggie seemed reluctant to address the issue, quickly whisking away returned plates without comment. By lunchtime, the diner was bustling again, and Ethan found himself rushing between tables, trying to keep up with orders. Despite the chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When the rush finally died down, Ethan decided to investigate further. He waited until Jake stepped outside for a cigarette break, a habit Ethan had noticed the cook indulged in frequently, and slipped into the kitchen. The kitchen was eerily quiet without Jake's gruff presence. Ethan moved cautiously, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. His eyes landed on the large stainless steel freezer tucked into the corner. It was slightly ajar, and a faint, unpleasant smell wafted out. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a flashlight, hanging from a hook on the wall, and opened the door wider. What he saw inside made his stomach churn. The freezer was crammed with packages of meat, vegetables, and other ingredients, many of which were far past their expiration dates. Some of the labels were faded, while others were completely illegible. A few packages had visible signs of spoilage, mold, growing on the edges, discoloration, and slimy textures that made Ethan's skin crawl. He picked up one package of ground beef and turned it over in his hands. The date stamped on the label was nearly 6 months old. Ethan felt a wave of anger and disbelief wash over him. How could anyone serve food like this to customers? And why hadn't Maggie or Lisa said anything about it? He snapped a few photos with his phone, knowing he needed evidence if he wanted to confront anyone later. Just as he was about to close the freezer door, he heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, Ethan shoved the package back inside and quickly closed the door, turning off the flashlight just in time. Jake walked in, exhaling a cloud of smoke as he entered the kitchen. He shot Ethan a suspicious glare. "What are you doing back here?" he growled. Ethan stammered, his heart pounding in his chest. "I was looking for the extra napkins. We ran out at table 7. Jake narrowed his eyes but didn't press the matter. "Next time, ask me first," he said gruffly before heading back to the grill. Ethan let out a shaky breath once Jake was gone. He knew he couldn't keep quiet about what he'd discovered, but he also realized he needed to tread carefully. If Jake found out what he'd seen, or worse, if he suspected Ethan was planning to expose him, it could get ugly. Later that evening, after closing time, Ethan stayed behind to help Maggie clean up. As they wiped down tables and swept the floors, Ethan mustered the courage to bring up the subject. "Hey, Maggie," he began hesitantly. "Can I ask you something?" Maggie paused mid-sweep and looked at him curiously. "Sure, Sam. What's on your mind?" "It's about the food," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "I've noticed some of the customers have been complaining lately. They say, it tastes off." Maggie's expression darkened and she glanced toward the kitchen where Jake was still cleaning up. "It's complicated," she said quietly, almost to herself. "What do you mean?" Ethan pressed, sensing that she knew more than she was letting on. Maggie sighed heavily, leaning against her broom. "Things haven't been easy around here," she admitted. "We've been struggling to make ends meet. Jake insists on using older stock to save money even though I've told him it's not safe. He says we don't have a choice." Ethan frowned, his anger bubbling to the surface. "But serving rotten food isn't just risky, it's dangerous. People could get sick." "I know," Maggie said, her voice trembling with frustration. "But Jake doesn't listen to me. He runs the kitchen his way and I can't afford to lose him. Without him, this place would fall apart." Ethan felt torn. On one hand, he understood Maggie's predicament. Running a business was hard, especially in a small town. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the fact that innocent people were being put at risk. He promised himself that he wouldn't stand by and let it continue. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he replayed the events of the day in his mind. He thought about the spoiled food in the freezer, Jake's menacing glare, and Maggie's desperate plea for understanding. He knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what yet. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. As sleep finally claimed him, Ethan resolved to dig deeper. Whatever secrets Maggie's kitchen held, he was determined to uncover them and put an end to the danger lurking behind those swinging kitchen doors. The next few days at Maggie's kitchen were a blur for Ethan. He tried to act normal, keeping up with his duties as a waiter while secretly planning his next move. But the weight of what he'd discovered, the spoiled food in the freezer, Jake's dismissive attitude, and Maggie's reluctant silence was always there, gnawing at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was sitting on a ticking time bomb, and every passing hour made it harder to ignore. Ethan knew he needed help. He couldn't confront Jake alone, not when the man was so unpredictable and intimidating. And while Maggie had confided in him about their financial struggles, she seemed too scared or too resigned to take action herself. That left one option: someone outside the diner who might be willing to listen and help expose the truth. His thoughts turned to Clara, a regular customer who often sat at the corner booth by the window. She was a journalist for the local newspaper, though she didn't talk much about her work. Instead, she spent most of her time typing away on her laptop or chatting casually with Maggie and the staff. Ethan had noticed how observant she was, always asking questions and jotting things down in a small notebook. If anyone could understand the gravity of what he'd found, it was her. On Thursday afternoon, during a rare lull in the diner's activity, Ethan approached Clara's booth. She looked up from her laptop, surprised to see him standing there. "Hey, Sam," she said with a friendly smile. "What's up?" "Can I sit?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Of course," Clara replied, closing her laptop and giving him her full attention. "Everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, unsure where to start. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I need your help," he said quietly. "Something's going on here, and I think you're the only person who can do something about it." Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Okay, tell me more." For the next 10 minutes, Ethan explained everything he'd seen and learned. The expired food in the freezer, the customers' complaints, Maggie's reluctance to stand up to Jake, and his own growing suspicion that the diner was putting people at risk. Clara listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as the story unfolded. "This is serious," she said when he finished. "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just bad business. It's dangerous." No, Ethan replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "But I don't know what to do. If I go straight to the health department, they'll shut the place down and Maggie will lose everything. And if Jake finds out I'm the one who reported him..." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Clara nodded thoughtfully. "We need proof," she said after a moment. "Solid evidence that shows exactly what's happening here. Without that, it's just your word against theirs." Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken of the spoiled food in the freezer. Clara studied them carefully, her jaw tightening as she scrolled through the images. "This is a start," she said, "but it's not enough. We need something undeniable, something that proves Jake is knowingly serving unsafe food." An idea began to form in Ethan's mind. "What if we set up a hidden camera?" he suggested. "In the kitchen, where we can catch Jake in the act?" Clara's eyes lit up. "That could work," she said. "But we'll have to be careful. If Jake catches us, things could get ugly." They spent the next hour coming up with a plan. Clara agreed to bring a small, discreet camera the following day, which Ethan would hide somewhere in the kitchen. They decided to focus on capturing footage of Jake preparing meals with the expired ingredients, as well as any interactions that might reveal his awareness of the problem. Once they had enough evidence, Clara would write an exposé for the local paper, shining a spotlight on the diner's practices and forcing authorities to take action. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the diner with a knot in his stomach. Clara had slipped him the camera earlier that day, a tiny device no bigger than a matchbox, and now it was tucked safely inside his pocket. As he tied on his apron and prepared for another busy shift, he reminded himself why he was doing this. It wasn't just about exposing Jake. It was about protecting the customers who trusted Maggie's kitchen to serve them safe, wholesome food. During the lunch rush, Ethan waited for the perfect opportunity to plant the camera. When Jake stepped outside for his usual cigarette break, Ethan seized the moment. He slipped into the kitchen, heart pounding, and quickly scanned the area for a good hiding spot. His eyes landed on a high shelf near the prep station, partially obscured by jars of spices. It was risky. It would be visible if someone looked closely, but it offered a clear view of the entire kitchen. With trembling hands, Ethan climbed onto a stool and positioned the camera, angling it slightly downward to capture both the cooking area and the fridge. He double-checked its placement, making sure it blended in with the clutter, then hopped down just as Jake re-entered the room. "What are you doing back here?" Jake barked, narrowing his eyes. Ethan forced a casual smile. "Just grabbing some ketchup for table 5, he lied, snatching a bottle from the counter before heading back out to the dining area. Over the next 2 days, Ethan kept a close eye on the camera, praying it wouldn't be discovered. Meanwhile, Clara monitored the footage remotely, letting him know via text whenever she caught something incriminating. By Saturday evening, they had more than enough evidence to prove Jake's negligence. But just as Ethan began to feel a sense of relief, disaster struck. On Sunday morning, as he was helping Maggie clean up after breakfast service, Jake stormed into the dining area, his face red with rage. In his hand, he held the tiny camera, its lens cracked but still recognizable. "Care to explain this?" Jake growled, slamming the device onto the counter. Ethan froze, his blood running cold. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Maggie step back, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Clara, who had stopped by for coffee, stood frozen in the doorway, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Jake's glare bore into Ethan. "Who are you really, and why are you spying on me?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan realized he had no choice but to come clean. Taking a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and met Jake's gaze head-on. "My name isn't Sam," he said firmly, "and I'm here because someone has to stop you from poisoning these people." Jake's expression darkened, and for a moment, Ethan feared the worst. But before the situation could escalate further, Maggie stepped forward, her voice shaking but resolute. "That's enough, Jake," she said. "I've known for a while that something was wrong, but I was too afraid to say anything. Not anymore." As the confrontation unfolded, Clara quietly dialed the police, ensuring that help would arrive soon. What happened next would change all of their lives forever. But for now, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The truth was finally coming to light, and justice might finally prevail. The moment Jake slammed the tiny camera onto the counter, the air in Maggie's kitchen turned electric. Every eye in the room was fixed on Ethan, waiting to see what he would do next. For a split second, Ethan felt like his knees might give out beneath him. He'd been caught red-handed, and now there was no turning back. But instead of crumbling under the pressure, something inside him clicked. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about protecting the people who trusted this diner and ensuring that Jake couldn't get away with his dangerous behavior any longer. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing around him. "But I can't stand by and let you serve rotten food to innocent customers." Jake's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you're some kind of hero? Sneaking around, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" He took a step closer, his towering frame looming over Ethan. "Do you have any idea what happens to people who cross me?" Ethan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, meeting Jake's glare with unwavering resolve. "I don't care what you do to me," he said firmly. "What I care about is making sure no one else gets sick, or worse because of you." Maggie, who had been standing silently nearby, finally found her voice. "Jake, stop this," she pleaded, her tone trembling but firm. "Enough is enough. You've been cutting corners for too long, and now we're paying the price." Jake whipped around to face her, his anger shifting momentarily. "Don't act like you're innocent, Maggie. You knew exactly what I was doing, and you let it happen. Don't try to pin this all on me." Maggie looked down at her hands, guilt flashing across her face. "You're right," she admitted softly. "I should have said something sooner, but I was scared. Scared of losing everything I've worked so hard for. That doesn't excuse what I did, though. It's wrong, and I know it." Her words seemed to catch Jake off guard, if only for a moment. But his anger quickly returned, sharper and more volatile than before. "This isn't your call to make," he shouted, his voice echoing through the diner. "If it weren't for me, this place would have gone under years ago." "That's not true," Maggie shot back, surprising everyone, including herself, with her sudden burst of courage. "You're the reason we're in this mess. Your shortcuts, your lies, they're going to ruin us. I won't let you destroy everything I've built." Jake stared at her, his jaw clenched tight. Then, without warning, he lunged toward Ethan, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt. "You think you can waltz in here and tear everything apart?" he snarled, shaking Ethan roughly. "You don't know anything about running a business or surviving when the odds are stacked against you." Ethan struggled to break free, but Jake's grip was ironclad. Just as things seemed to spiral out of control, Clara stepped forward, her notebook still clutched in her hand. "Let him go, Jake," she demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. "The police are already on their way." Jake froze, his head snapping toward her. "What did you say?" "She called them," Ethan said, seizing the opportunity to speak. "And they'll be here any minute. There's no way out of this, Jake. You've been caught." For a moment, the room went completely still. Jake's eyes darted between Ethan, Maggie, and Clara, searching for a way to escape. But there was none. The weight of his actions and the evidence stacked against him finally hit home. Slowly, reluctantly, he released his grip on Ethan, letting him stumble backward. "You're making a big mistake," Jake muttered, backing away toward the kitchen. His voice was low and venomous, but it lacked the confidence he'd shown just moments earlier. "All of you." Before anyone could stop him, Jake turned and bolted toward the back door, slamming it shut behind him. The sound of his heavy footsteps echoed as he disappeared into the alley outside. Maggie sank into a chair, her hands covering her face as tears began to stream down her cheeks. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. How could I let this happen? Ethan knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's not too late to fix things, he said reassuringly. We stopped him before anyone got seriously hurt, that's what matters. Clara nodded in agreement. And once the story breaks, people will understand why you kept quiet. They'll see how much you've sacrificed to keep this place alive and how brave you were to finally speak up. Maggie looked up at them, her eyes red but filled with determination. I won't let Jake's mistakes define us, she said, wiping her tears away. This diner may need to close for a while, but when it reopens, it'll be better than ever. Safer, cleaner, honest. As they waited for the police to arrive, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He'd come to Maggie's kitchen, hoping to reconnect with the real world, to step outside the bubble of his corporate life and experience something raw and authentic. What he hadn't expected was to uncover such darkness, and to find himself fighting alongside ordinary people who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. When the authorities finally arrived, Maggie explained everything: the spoiled food, Jake's negligence, and the steps they'd taken to expose the truth. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and inspecting the kitchen thoroughly. By the time they left, the diner was officially closed, pending further investigation, and Jake was wanted for questioning. That night, as Ethan walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, he felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was exhausted, yes, but also exhilarated. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, not because of power or prestige, but because he'd made a difference. Even if it was just in a small-town diner, he'd helped shine a light in the darkness. As he lay in bed later that evening, Ethan realized something important. Heroes didn't always wear capes or deliver grand speeches. Sometimes they were waiters, cooks, or journalists, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And sometimes even CEOs could trade their suits for aprons and discover a whole new side of themselves. Tomorrow would bring challenges, both for Maggie's kitchen and for Ethan personally. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that justice, even in its smallest form, had prevailed. The days following Jake's disappearance were difficult for everyone at Maggie's kitchen. The diner remained closed, its once bustling interior now eerily quiet. Chairs were stacked upside down on tables, and the faint smell of grease lingered in the air, a reminder of the life that used to fill the space. Maggie spent most of her time inside, cleaning and reorganizing, though it was clear she wasn't just tidying up. She was processing everything that had happened. Ethan visited often, even though he no longer worked there. He felt responsible for what had unfolded and wanted to support Maggie however he could. At first she seemed distant, lost in thought, but over time she began opening up to him. One afternoon, as they sat together at one of the booths, Maggie finally broke her silence. I never thought I'd see the day when this place would close, she said softly, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. It's been my home for 20 years. My husband helped me build it from scratch. Now, she trailed off, her voice cracking with emotion. Ethan reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on hers. You're not losing it forever, he said gently. This is just a pause, a chance to start fresh. Maggie nodded, though doubt still shadowed her eyes. I know you're right, but starting over feels impossible sometimes. There's so much damage to undo, not just with the health inspectors, but with our customers. How do I earn their trust back after all this? You will, Ethan replied firmly. People respect honesty. If you tell them the truth about what happened and how you're fixing it, they'll understand. They might even admire your courage. Clara played a big role in helping Maggie rebuild her reputation. Over the next week, she wrote an article detailing the events at Maggie's kitchen, focusing not on the scandal itself but on Maggie's decision to come forward and make things right. The piece highlighted Maggie's decades of hard work and dedication to the community, painting her as a victim of circumstance rather than complicity. When the article was published, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Dozens of regular customers reached out to offer their support, vowing to return once the diner reopened. Encouraged by the public's reaction, Maggie decided it was time to take action. With Ethan's help, she began drafting a plan to revamp the diner. They started by throwing away every expired or questionable item in the kitchen and pantry, leaving only fresh ingredients behind. Maggie invested in new equipment and supplies, determined to meet and exceed health department standards. She also hired a part-time consultant to teach her staff proper food safety practices, ensuring nothing like this would ever happen again. As the renovations progressed, Ethan found himself growing closer to Maggie and her team. Lisa, who had always been kind to him, became a trusted confidant, sharing stories about the diner's history and offering advice on how to move forward. Even Clara stopped by occasionally, bringing updates from the community and pitching ideas for marketing the diner's relaunch. One evening, as Ethan and Maggie stood side by side in the newly cleaned kitchen, she turned to him with a smile. "You've done so much for me, Sam. Or should I say Ethan?" she teased lightly. "I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." Ethan chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Honestly, I think I got more out of this experience than you did. Working here reminded me of why I started my company in the first place, to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. You helped me remember." Maggie's expression softened. "Well, I'm glad we could help each other. And speaking of differences, I've been thinking, maybe it's time for a new beginning for all of us." She went on to explain her idea, renaming the diner to reflect its renewed commitment to quality and integrity. After some discussion, they settled on Fresh Starts Cafe, a name that captured both the diner's transformation and the second chances everyone involved had earned. The reopening day arrived faster than anyone expected. Maggie worked tirelessly to prepare, decorating the space with bright flowers, new menus, and a freshly painted sign above the door. When the morning finally came, a crowd gathered outside, eager to see the changes for themselves. As Maggie unlocked the door and welcomed them in, tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. Throughout the day, Ethan stayed busy assisting with orders and chatting with customers. Many thanked him personally for his role in exposing the truth, though he humbly deflected their praise. "It wasn't just me," he insisted. "Maggie and Clara did the heavy lifting. I was just along for the ride." By evening, the diner was buzzing with laughter and conversation, its warmth and charm restored. As Ethan prepared to leave, Maggie pulled him aside for a private moment. "Before you go, I have something for you," she said, handing him a small envelope. Curious, Ethan opened it to find a handwritten note and a gift card for the cafe. The note read, "Thank you for believing in us, and for reminding me that doing the right thing is always worth it. Come back anytime." Ethan smiled, tucking the note into his pocket. "I'll be back," he promised. "This place has become special to me." As he walked away from the diner that night, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. He'd come to Maggie's kitchen seeking connection and purpose, and in the process, he'd gained far more than he'd anticipated. The experience had changed him, not just as a leader, but as a person. For the first time in years, he felt grounded, inspired, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as the lights of Fresh Starts Cafe glowed softly in the distance, Ethan knew that this chapter of his life, one filled with lessons, friendships, and growth, would stay with him forever. Weeks turned into months, and Fresh Starts Cafe became more than just a diner. It became a symbol of hope and renewal for the small town. Maggie's hard work paid off as word spread about the changes she'd made. Regular customers returned, eager to support her, and new faces appeared almost daily, drawn by glowing reviews and recommendations. The cafe buzzed with life once again, but this time it felt different. There was a sense of pride in the air, a shared understanding that something meaningful had been accomplished. Ethan visited often, though not as frequently as he would have liked. His responsibilities as CEO kept him busy, pulling him back to the city and the demands of his corporate world. Still, whenever he could steal away for a weekend or even just an afternoon, he made sure to stop by. Each visit reminded him of how much he'd grown during his time at Maggie's kitchen, and how much he still had to learn. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan walked into the cafe to find Maggie arranging fresh flowers on each table. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Well, if it isn't my favorite undercover CEO," she joked, gesturing for him to take a seat at the counter. "Undercover no more," Ethan replied with a grin, sliding onto a stool. "I think everyone knows who I am now." Maggie laughed, pouring him a cup of coffee. "True enough, but don't worry, I won't tell anyone you used to trip over your own feet carrying plates." Ethan chuckled, taking a sip of the rich aromatic brew. "Thanks for sparing me that embarrassment. How's everything going?" "It's going great," Maggie said, her tone filled with quiet pride. "We passed the health inspection last week with flying colors. The customers love the new menu and Lisa says business is better than ever. I never thought we'd bounce back so quickly." "You deserve it," Ethan said sincerely. "You put your heart into this place and it shows." Maggie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It wasn't easy, though. Some nights I wondered if I'd made the right choice, closing down, starting over, risking everything. But looking back, I know it was worth it. This cafe isn't just a business anymore, it's a promise to our customers, to myself, and to the community." Ethan listened intently, feeling a deep respect for Maggie's resilience. Her journey mirrored his own in many ways. Like her, he'd faced moments of doubt and fear, questioning whether he was doing the right thing. And like her, he'd discovered that growth came not from avoiding challenges but from facing them head-on. Their conversation was interrupted by Clara, who breezed through the door holding a copy of the local newspaper. "Morning, Maggie." "Morning." "Ethan," she greeted cheerfully, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Have you seen today's edition yet?" Maggie shook her head. "Not yet. What's the big news?" Clara grinned, opening the paper to reveal an article on the front page. The headline read, "Fresh Starts Cafe, a model for small business success." Beneath it was a photo of Maggie standing proudly in front of the cafe, surrounded by smiling staff and customers. "Oh, Clara," Maggie said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is incredible." "You earned it," Clara replied, handing her the paper. "People love what you've done here, not just fixing the problems, but turning this place into something truly special. You've set an example for other businesses to follow." Ethan leaned over to read the article, impressed by how far Maggie had come. The piece highlighted her commitment to transparency, quality, and community involvement, offering practical advice for other struggling small businesses. It was clear that Fresh Starts Cafe had become more than just a diner. It was a beacon of inspiration. As the day went on, Ethan found himself reflecting on his own role in the story. He hadn't set out to change anything when he first arrived at Maggie's kitchen. All he'd wanted was to reconnect with the real world, to step outside the polished halls of his corporation and experience something raw and authentic. Instead, he'd stumbled into a situation that tested his courage, empathy, and integrity, and ultimately transformed him. That evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Maggie pulled him aside one last time. "Before you go, there's something I want to say," she began, her voice steady but heartfelt. "You didn't just help save this diner. You reminded me, and everyone else here, that doing the right thing matters. Even when it's hard, even when it feels impossible, it's always worth it." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you, Maggie. That means a lot coming from you. But honestly, I think I owe you just as much. You taught me what it means to lead with heart, and to value people over profits." They shared a long, meaningful look before Maggie hugged him tightly. When they parted, Ethan turned toward the door, pausing briefly to glance back at the bustling cafe. The laughter, chatter, and clinking of dishes created a symphony of connection and belonging, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of his office boardroom. Back in the city, Ethan carried the lessons of Maggie's kitchen with him. He began implementing changes within his company, prioritizing employee well-being and transparency in decision-making. Inspired by Maggie's courage, he encouraged his team to speak up about issues they saw, fostering a culture of accountability and trust. Slowly but surely, his company started to feel less like a machine and more like a family. Months later, Ethan received a letter from Maggie. Inside was an invitation to the cafe's one-year anniversary celebration. She wrote, "We couldn't have done it without you. Come celebrate with us, you're part of the Fresh Starts family now." Ethan smiled as he tucked the invitation into his desk drawer, already planning his trip. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected, not just to his business, but to the people who made it possible. Whether serving coffee in a small town, diner, or leading a global tech company, he realized that the principles were the same: kindness, honesty, and a willingness to do what's right. As he gazed out the window of his high-rise office, watching the city lights twinkle below, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the smallest actions could spark the biggest changes. And sometimes, all it took was stepping out of your comfort zone to discover who you really were and who you could become.